So what I want to do is now I want to start touching on, if you notice you have a chart in your reading, you can pull that out. We're going to skip around a little bit. The stages of meditation. This chart comes from... Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, and and we'll read that Tibetan out loud. If somebody would start for us, please. No, we're not going to go. We're not going to go through this. This is a week-long course to really go through all of this. But I just wanted to give you a taste of how it's articulated. But this chart, this particular chart, was drawn by Kebje Trijang Rinpoche, who was one of the tutors of the present Dalai Lama. And Trijang Rinpoche is just considered one of the, imagine if you're going to have a tutor for the head of the state, it's going to be one of the smartest people and the most accomplished people. And Trijang Rinpoche was really wonderful. But all he did was draw the chart, but the original chart was drawn and described by a wonderful man named Kamalashila, who comes from the 4th century, his dates are 740 to 795 AD. And there's roughly two branches, a quick, not that you signed up for this, but a quick introduction to Buddhism. There's roughly two branches. The Buddha, and we see the same thing in Christianity, right? You see the charismatic leader of the religion, right? Like Jesus or Buddha, who were neither Buddhist nor Christian, right? I mean, Jesus wasn't Christian, the Buddha wasn't Buddhist, but they are just reformers in a way. Then when their passing happens, the students get together and try to figure out what was the message, right? And then you have all the different councils. I just spent a couple of weeks learning about all the different councils of the Christian church and what each one of them decided against and for. And the most famous one in the Episcopal world, right, is the Nicene Council, right? But it's like, okay, we decide that now this is the teaching of Jesus, So the same thing happened in Buddhism. There you had 10 different councils. And eventually what happened is the church, the Buddhist world split into two, what you could roughly call those who adopted the Pali canon, and Pali is a language, so all the scriptures that were written in Pali, and those that adopted the Sanskrit canon, all the scriptures written in Sanskrit. So there's two branches, which are roughly called Mahayana and Theravada now. Some examples of Mahayana path, which is mostly what I've been trained in, are like Zen, Tibetan Buddhism. So those are, kind of some of the impetuses of that canon. And then the Pali canon, you have countries like Burma, what's oftentimes called Vipassana, and different branches of that. Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg comes out of that Pali canon. Pema Chodron comes out of the Mahayana canon. So that, just to say that this is coming out of the Mahayana canon, from Kamalashila, is kind of the grandfather of all meditation in the Mahayana canon. So this is a chart, and it is very accurate. And it's a progression, what's called a stage-based approach, like I mentioned last night, on how meditation unfolds. Stage 1, stage 2, what you need to know for each different stage. Now here's the problem, and really listen up because this is super important. It turns out meditation doesn't unfold that way. Yeah, it turns out it's not a linear progression. So the stage-based approach is very helpful because everybody in here can identify what stage you're at, and depending on what stage you're at, that's what you should be working on. The problem is, if you think stage 2 leads to stage 3, you're going to be frustrated. Because stage 2 might lead to stage 8, and stage 8 might lead to stage 2. Okay, so you all know that game, Chutes and Ladders? That game is an Indian game, and this is the true history of that game. That game was designed to emulate the spiritual path. That game, like Parcheesi, they both come out of India, but particularly Chutes and Ladders was designed to emulate the spiritual path. And so we are talking about a stage-based approach, but it's going to look a lot more like Chutes and Ladders. And if you forget the game, you climb up the ladder, and then you hit the slide, and you go all the way back down to 1. So don't get frustrated. Awakening doesn't happen in this linear way, but it is helpful to understand it as a linear process. Okay, did I lose anybody there? Okay, because that's important. The type A personalities among us will be like, awesome, what do I have to do to get to stage 3, And they're going to be very frustrated. There's this old Zen story, I'm sure you've heard it, but this kid comes up to a Zen master and he says, I feel very, very dedicated to becoming enlightened. How long will it take? and the Zen master says, if you're really that dedicated, it'll take 2 or 3 years. And he says, what about if I devote everything to that totally single focus? And he says, no, it'll take about 70 years. And again, it's any attempt to create a non-agitated state of mind is itself an agitated state of mind. So it's this funny thing of like, the more we try, the further away we get. You can't force yourself into learning to refine relinquishment. But here's the hopeful thing, I think, for us, and I want to touch on this from a couple different angles. What that does mean is as we get older and more mature and more wise, we are more in tune with progressing on the spiritual path. In other words, for God's sake, we at least have one advantage over 20-year-olds, right? Is that we just have some more skills in developing and maturing on the path, which is that ability to refine relinquishment, which is surrender, right? And risking vulnerability. Both of those skills are needed to progress along the path. So roughly, let's look at stages 1 through 4. So I'll just tell you a couple of symbolisms here. So it's really hard to see, but kind of in the bottom left-hand corner of the first curve on the path, you see a big flame. I don't know if you can see that in this difficult Xerox, but there's a little flame coming off the bottom of the first bend, a flame like a fire.
Is this our number 7?
Yes, I think that is a number 7. I don't have my glasses. Yeah, exactly, right at the number 7 there. You can notice every turn has a flame associated with it. If you follow up the path, you notice there's flames all the way. What does the flame represent? The flame represents the amount of effort that stage takes. Guess what takes the most? Stage 1. It is the hardest thing on this whole path to awakening. The hardest thing is to develop a daily habit. So if you don't have a daily habit of practice, there's good and bad news. You are at the hardest point of the journey. If you do have a daily practice, you are now kind of going downhill. Not quite. I mean, it's going to be easier and easier. That doesn't mean that there's not a lot of effort that's needed, but the most effort is developing a daily practice.
You got to show up.
You got to show up.
Whether you feel like it or not, you got to show up.
Yeah, and you guys with Cecily and with Harry, you have wonderful opportunities in this community to be together, to sit together. And really, what I was saying yesterday, Thich Nhat Hanh was saying that community is the new guru. I mean, being together is so helpful. And also as a side point, I am so grateful to Trinity and to Mark and to everybody having me because by me teaching, it keeps me in the marketplace, keeps me on the path. When I don't feel like meditating, I was like, I don't want to dip to that level of hypocrisy because I'm about to teach meditation. So I use you all to keep me progressed on the path. So I'm just so grateful. I could do this stuff if I was all alone and just talk to myself, but it really helps to have people here. So thank you for coming and being a part of that. But really, it's being together that helps push us on the path. So the first stage is really developing a practice. So at stage 1, what do you need to focus on? Stage 1, what you really need to focus on is daily dedication. And again, I think that this technique is very helpful. 3 minutes a day, 6 days a week for 40 days. Just do it. Just go for it. and then decide after 40 days, see if you want to do that again or see if you want to increase the number of minutes. One way to increase the minutes after 40 days is add a minute a week for the rest of your life. And then it'll be very interesting. You just suddenly increase in your capacity. I recently met a person who says they have not missed a day of meditation in 65 years. And he does 2 hours, 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening, and he hasn't missed a single one of those. I was astounded. I was like, that is not me, you know? I've done some 3-minute meditations over the years, you know, but...
Must not have kids.
Yeah, totally, I think so. A quick side point about that, a wonderful book, if you want to read a book, is called The Life of Dipa Ma, Dipama. This is a very poor single mother who sits hours a day. A working single mother who sits hours a day. She is the main teacher of Jack Kornfield and Sharon Salzberg, and she is she's passed away now, but she is a phenomenal human being. And she totally dismisses this idea of not having time to meditate. She tells Jack Kornfield one time, she says, Jack, don't be lazy. Why don't you do a 3-day sit? And he's like, what, you mean like sit for three days? She's like, no, sit in one meditation for 3 days. Like, what would that be? 48 plus 24, 72 hours. Do one 72-hour sit. And he's like, you're insane. You know, he didn't do it. But she's the kind of person that can actually do that, which is a level that's astounding, you know. And she says, "Oh, you're just being lazy, Jack." But so anyway, that's a wonderful book. And when I read that book, I'm like, "Whew, I gotta up my game a little bit." She was hardcore, like, stop complaining, go sit, you know. And that can be helpful sometimes. So stage 1, develop a daily practice. The other interesting thing, which I really want to focus on at the end of class, is, you can write this down if you want, is de-reify. It's a fancy word. I wrote the word for you on your handout. Page 1. You can see reification. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but stage 1, what you want to work on is de-reifying the object of meditation. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So stage 1, you're working on de-reifying the object.
What is de-reify?
I know, we're going to talk about it in a minute. So I'm telling you before I explain it.
Okay.
Yeah, which is a Tibetan technique, you know, for better or for worse. In the Tibetan monasteries, you memorize, and I'm giving you a metaphor of how the Tibetan education system works. You would memorize, let's say, a calculus textbook, literally memorize it, so you can, and you just recite it out loud. It wouldn't really be that. It'd be like logic, you know, 203 or something. And when you're a little kid, so by the time you get to, you know, age 18 and you're actually studying that, you've already memorized the text. So as a kid, you memorize it having no idea what it means. And that's just the way the Tibetans do their education system. So you memorize this stuff. You have no, you know, as a kid, you have no idea what it means. And then suddenly you're 18 and you're like in calculus, and they're teaching it to you. You've already memorized the whole text. It's really interesting, and it's just a different way. So sometimes my teachers would tell me stuff, and they'll say, we'll explain that in 3 years, but just memorize it. So I'm kind of doing that with you right now. We'll talk about reification in a minute. Now here's what are the lines here? Imagine that, let's see, imagine that my thermos is when my mind is on the object. And for simplicity's sake, let me say the object being the breath, right? So here's when I'm on the breath, and then my phone is when I'm off the breath, okay? So my phone is thinking about, I'm obsessed personally with interior design. So in 3-year retreat, that's where my mind would go. I would be like meditating, thinking, you know, being in my object of meditation, and then all of a sudden I'm like in a friend's kitchen. I'm like, if they just took out that wall, it would really open up that space and move that sink, you know. So that's where my mind would wander, either shark attacks or interior design, okay? So this is the mind on the breath, and this is like shark attacks or interior design. So stage 1 is the line means I'm on the breath. So most of that time I'm off the breath, right? So off, oh, remember the breath, like that. So that's kind of stage 1. Stage 2, notice there's some longer periods where you're on the object, right? Some suspension, and then like, okay, on it again, a little bit off for a while, and then you might be on again for a little while. And then stage 3, you have what's called patching, where you're patching together moments of awareness of the breath. So now here I'm on the breath for a bit, and then oops, there we go, shark attacks, and then back on the breath, and then okay, curtain colors, and back, so it's like that. So you can see that's just a simple progression of how we move. So how do you find where you are? Really, it's a percentage thing. Are you off the breath more than on the breath? Or off the meditation object more than on? No problem. You're working at stage 1 that day, or that week, or that month, or that year. Are you off the breath more than on, but you have occasional moments where you can stay with the object of meditation for a minute or 2 minutes without losing it? Great, then you're at level 2. Are you on the breath, more on the object? And again, I'm saying breath synonymously with object. You might be doing mantras or you might be doing visualizations. So I'm just saying breath, but really what I mean is whatever object of meditation you've chosen. Are you on the object of meditation more than off, but you still get lost in mind wandering sometime? Great, you're at stage 3, okay? Now, stage 4 is a different type of practice, because stage 4, for the first time in our lives, we now do no longer lose the object of meditation. Now, we might lose clarity of the object, but we no longer fully lose it. So now at stage 4, we're working with some new skills, and those skills are starting to work with what's called gross dullness and gross agitation. Okay, and I mostly just wanted to talk about stage 1 through 4. So let's back up. So I talked about what to work on with stage 1, right? What were they? Quick quiz, pop quiz. Yeah, so that's one technique. And what else are we working on with stage 1? What are the daily dedication? Yeah, daily dedication. And what's the other thing we haven't talked about yet? Dereifying the object of meditation. Okay, so those are what we're working on. Stage 2, what are we working on? We're working on increasing clarity of the object. Okay, just trying to increase the clarity that we're making that the object is. Notice you can have an idea of the breath, but it's really fuzzy. You're like, oh yeah, there's the inhale, there's the exhale. But it's very different when you come into real contact with all of the detail of the breath. So we're increasing clarity. And then what we're also doing at stage 2 is now we're working on the muscle of returning to the object with diligence. What do I mean by that? I'll be meditating and I'll be with the breath, and all of a sudden I move to interior design and I'm like redesigning my mom's kitchen, right? Or my mom's bathroom. This happened one time. And suddenly I have that awakening. I rejoice, fantastic. It feels so nice to wake up. I'm supposed to be meditating. I'm working on my parents' bathroom, redesigning it. So I was like, okay, so that waking up, I appreciate that. And then can I return directly to the object? But here's what happens sometimes. We're thinking like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be meditating. Okay, I'll go right back to the object. Just let me finish one little thing in my mind, in my fantasy. Let me just rip up the carpet and see what it would look like with, some sectional carpets, And there's just, the mind is really reluctant to let go of its fantasies, negative or positive, revenge fantasies. You're like, I'll come right back to the object of meditation, but let me just finish this little fantasy. That's what I mean. At stage 2, you now have to drop the object. You have to be very dedicated and just really say, okay, now I need to work on a new level of practice. Level 1, you don't have to worry about that. It's not important. You just forget about it. But level 2, you're like, okay, drop the object. One of my teachers told me, and this was so important, so helpful for me, he said it's like telling a dog to drop the ball, and you just have to be very forceful. Drop it, like that kind of like, yeah. And I had to do that with myself. Will, drop it right now. He's like, I will, but just no, drop it, So that's what we're working on stage 2. Stage 3, we're working on, and this one it becomes very difficult because we're working on resisting indulging in dullness. And again, I talked about this before the break. Dullness feels pleasurable, and we really have to resist the indulgence in that. The way that I really work through this stage is realizing that I couldn't be of help to anybody in this world if I didn't get through this stage. So I had to use other people. I was like, oh, I want to be a light in this world. I want to create clarity. Drop it for nobody's sake, but for somebody else's. They did a experiment. I read about this once, and they put up in the bathrooms of hospitals, they put up a sign and says, washing your hands prevents you from getting sickness. And then what they did was they measured the amount of people walking in and out of the bathroom, the amount of paper towels used, and they measured the amount of water use. Right? So in other words, they were seeing how many people washed their hands. And then they changed the sign, and they said, washing your hands prevents others from getting diseases. And we wash our hands more often when we're reminded that it's helping others. So that's all I mean at this stage, is what I had to do is remind myself, this is not just about you, this is about creating clarity in the world, And that's how I resisted indulging in dullness. Because again, dullness feels wonderful, and it's a very hard stage to get over. Now, there is a type of dullness where you're just exhausted. And I remember I went to one of my lamas and I said, I keep falling asleep in meditation. How do I work with that? And he said, go take a nap. He said, go to sleep. He said, sleep in, like for God's sake, get enough sleep, So there is one thing that we're just also exhausted. And I do find most of us are exhausted, emotionally, physically. So get enough sleep. Figure out I've designed my life around my practice as opposed to the other way around. So I personally am the sharpest after my afternoon nap. I take like a 5-minute afternoon nap, and then that's when I do my longest meditation. So, figure out when you're sharpest, and then use that for your practice. We do a morning and an evening practice as well, but that's just to keep us kind of grounded. So usually I sit 3 times a day. The morning and evening are very short, just 5-10-minute sits in the little community that we have. And then my afternoon practice will be my real practice. And then number 4, let's see. Oh, and then the other thing with number 3, the other thing we're really working on is what we talked about last night, is appreciating that awakening moment. Really appreciating awakening. Which means not beating yourself up for mind wandering. Right? And that's a very, very amazing thing to overcome. How do you know you've overcome this? Okay, and again, I'm not exaggerating. This is literally what I mean. Let's say you do a 1-hour sit. Let's say you're spaced out heavily for 59 minutes of that sit. You have one little moment of waking up. Let's say even 20 seconds. You're like, oh, I'm supposed to be meditating. And then you go right back into mind wandering. If you can get up from that sit feeling like you just had a very successful meditation, you've accomplished that, switching from self-recrimination to appreciating your effort. And I propose that is accurate. You just had a very successful meditation. Why? Because you did it and you had an awakening moment in that meditation. Now, for years, if somebody said, how was your meditation? I've been like, it sucked again, It's like this energy. It's like, ugh, right? But as soon as I made that switch, and if somebody were to ask me, how was your meditation? And I was spaced out for 59 minutes, I'd be like, it was incredible. I had an awakening experience. It was great. So it's just like, it's the upliftment, right? It's the shoulders back. It's the heart open. It's just like, right? In yoga class, there's no instruction of like curl your shoulders in, protect your heart, and just notice how it is in your body when you get up from the sit. You feel like, oh, that was beautiful. Plenty of room for improvement, but I really did a great job by risking intimacy and sitting down with my practice. Does that make sense? So that's really what we're working on in stage 3. Yeah, Mary.
I don't want to, anyway, I
No.
just wonder, because I have times like that where I'm just spaced out.
Totally.
But it's still helpful somehow, like, there's more spaciousness afterwards. I mean, I guess my question is there any use, is there something that's helpful even in being spaced out in your meditation?
Right. So and again, this is how I was able to work through this stage, because I had the same thought. I was like, well, I do feel more relaxed and I feel like more at ease. I simply separated out meditative practices from meditation. So what I did was I actually increased my meditative practices. And sometimes my meditative practices, if you were to look at me from the outside, it might look like I'm doing the exact same thing. I might be sitting in meditation, but in my mind, I'm doing a meditative practice, which is I'm just relaxing. I might even be spacing out. I might be just doing some light visualization, and I'm not working on anything. The analogy is like if I'm trying to learn piano, sometimes I might be working on scales, and other times I might just be playing what I already know because it's joyful to do something you're already good at. When I'm doing something I'm already good at, I'm not increasing my skill very much, a little bit maybe, but I'm just kind of moving in the rut that the patterns that I'm already good at. The key thing, and again, this is one of my teachers told me, separate those two out and don't confuse them at all. And I can't stress this enough. If you want to train in meditation, you have to do the training, which means you go in with a very clear intention that you're going to try to increase your capacity. And again, how do you increase capacity? By letting go of effort. Now here's the thing, and this is a subtle point, is that you'll notice that mind wandering, when you let go of mind wandering, it's a releasing. So mind wandering takes a very subtle type of effort. It's a grasping. One second. So oftentimes when we're mind wandering, we think it's like we're moving from effort to like, oh, relax and mind wandering. But really what's happening is the opposite. When we mind wander, it's actually a kind of grasping. And you'll notice when you have that awakening of I'm supposed to be meditating, and then you go back into clarity, it's a So I'm talking about like training, but again, the training is releasing. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, what were we going to say?
Just thinking, when I came to meditation, it was through mindfulness, it was through wellness. It's branded as wellness. Branded, I think, my interpretation as a meditation.
Exactly.
Not as meditation. So I have spent many, many years learning myself on apps and things like that. What I shouldn't, that it should be skill building.
Yeah.
I just wish that it wasn't branded as wellness.
Yeah, and that's, and I think that, exactly, and that's been my experience too, is that have you noticed that our culture kind of tends to take the sacred and just make it so vanilla that it just loses some of the depth to it. It's just a way that we take sacred practices and we just make them more, we just lose some of the depth. And so I think a lot of the really profundity of meditation is lost because it's been branded as just well-being. And again, I think people, in my experience, very few people are actually interested in the training. Now here's the other thing, and this is really important for us to remember, is that you do not need to be a meditator to have a fulfilling, meaningful spiritual life. You do not need to be a meditator to have awakening experiences. We overestimate the benefits of meditation in this culture. I can't tell you how many people come to me and like, if only I could learn to meditate, then everything will be okay. And I'm proof that it's not. I remember I was studying yoga with this wonderful teacher, Richard Freeman, and we were doing Paschimottanasana, forward fold, And he's like completely flat on his legs, folding forward, and I'm like, like this, right? And he looks up to me and he says, I've been to the feet and I can report that there's nothing to report. Because it's this idea, is as soon as I get to the feet, then everything will work out, right? And it's not true. Meditation is not a golden bullet. It's not a golden pill. It's not going to solve all your problems. So as soon as we stop exaggerating meditation, we can then really engage it in a more joyful way. So if you're not prone to be a meditator, you're fine. One of my teachers says, and it's such a great statement, he says, awakening is an accident, and all meditation does is make you more accident prone. It just helps assist you, but you can have awakenings without that. So just in line with that, we don't have to see like I wasted my life, and those meditative practices are helpful, but I have seen again and again and again when people separate those out, then they progress in a very different way. Yeah, Cecily.
I'm fascinated holding a magnifying glass
Yeah.
to meditation. I've
Yeah.
never heard that done before or thought about it.
Yeah.
And I hear Baba Muktananda, the Siddha Yoga pass in my
Totally.
ear saying, there is no bad meditation.
Yeah.
There's only meditation.
Yeah.
Give up all ideas of improving.
Yeah.
And when I look at that, I think, am I in stage 3? Or am I in
Totally.
stage 4? Then I hear this, give up all ideas of improvement.
Totally.
So
Cecily's bringing up a really key point that always comes up, and it's that anything I can say about meditation is going to be a paradox, right? And again, I often teach in yoga studios, and so in a yoga studio, it's easy to demonstrate this because the question comes up, are you trying to achieve the pose or not, right? And the answer is yes and no, because as soon as I'm trying to achieve the pose, I lose the beauty of right where I am is the pose. You see what I mean? Wherever I find myself, that is the pose. After I used to be a bit of a yogi, and then after I herniated my disc, like my yoga practice looks very different, but where I'm at is the edge, and the edge is where yoga happens. You see what I mean? So it's not how it looks, right? So yes, I'm trying to achieve the pose, and at the same time, I'm not trying to achieve anything. So what Cecily's bringing up is, are you trying to achieve something in meditation? The answer is yes and no. It's a paradox. You can say, no, stop trying to achieve anything. But the problem with that just being too much in that category is then won't actually do the training. But if you're in the training category, any attempt to create a non-agitated state of mind is itself an agitation. So you're going to be just going in circles, and you're not going to actually learn to let go. So it is a paradox, and that's why it's so hard to talk about it, because anything I could say about it, I could do an entire another day and just contradict everything I've told you today. Just like I'm just it's this living form that we're trying to play within. Okay, so now working at it from this approach, now what is stage 4? What I'm working with stage 4? I'm working with now trying to permanently get rid of what's called gross dullness and gross agitation. And then, so particularly with gross agitation, like how would I work on combating gross agitation? One of the ways for both working with gross dullness and gross agitation is cultivating mindfulness in the way that I defined it. Optimal balance between attention and awareness. And let me just get, and then we'll kind of stop the chart for now, but let me give you one example of what that would look like. Okay, I want to work on gross agitation and dullness. I never lose the object, but the object I still have agitation and dullness that comes up. So the first thing we want to work on is agitation. How do I work on that? Periodically, and this helps with dullness too, periodically throughout the meditation, pause and just take a look around, not physically, but internally. How's my practice? Do I have dullness? Is my mind agitated? Just notice that. Like, where am I at with that? The ways agitation will show up is insight, as I mentioned earlier. You're like, oh, wow, it must be related to this. Anytime we make connections, that's a type of insight. Insight is not bad, but it's a distraction in practice. Anytime you have light bulbs, it's like, oh my gosh, I never realized this. That's so interesting. It would apply to this as well. I got to tell this person about this. Those are all insights. Now, they might be legitimate insights, but they're a hindrance to your practice. They're just trivia. And I tend to, for me, practice is now more, I suffer from like, I feel like I'm having insight, you know? And it just, can I drop that and just come back to presence with the object of meditation? And again, dullness we talked about is just gross dullness. We're just trying to get rid of that gross dullness. Now, as we move 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we're then drop gross dullness and gross agitation, and we move into working with subtle dullness and subtle agitation. Then stage 8, something really beautiful happens. We have, and these stages are talked about in slightly different ways in different traditions, but roughly they're the same. We have something called mental pliancy. It's an amazing thing that the mind is capable of. And then stage 9, we have mental and physical pliancy. And so mental and physical pliancy means that you no longer have any physical discomfort in the body. And you can put your mind on an object and keep it there with almost no effort at all, and it'll stay very, very clear on the object, and you can just hold it there. It's just like the tiniest effort to put your mind on the object, and then you back off of any effort. My very first time experiencing this, I was having severe back pain from my herniated discs. And it was amazing all of that went away, and I could sit for 3 or 4 hours with no effort, and this I think is how Deepa Ma must be able to do a 3-day sit, which I could never do. But when you're really resting in mental physical pliancy, the body feels totally at ease, totally comfortable. And the mind can just be placed on an object, and it's just effortless. And that feels fantastic. So then you're working on things of, then you start to work in the higher stages towards letting go of things like elation and illusions of grandeur and things like that. It just becomes a calming as opposed to so roughly that's how the practice unfolds.